Let me be direct with you from the outset because what unfolded between 11 p.m. Eastern Time on May 9th and 4 a.m. on May 10th demands directness. What we witnessed at the Al-Tanf garrison in southeastern Syria was not a routine troop rotation. It was not a scheduled redeployment. It was not force restructuring. What we witnessed was an emergency evacuation of 847 American military personnel from a base the Pentagon has occupied since 2016, and the reason for that evacuation is something the Department of Defense is calling, in internal communications, an asymmetric electromagnetic event. I am looking at satellite imagery that has been analyzed by 3 separate military intelligence contractors over the past 72 hours, and what it shows is not incoming artillery. It is not drone strikes. It is not conventional military pressure. What it shows is a 12-hour window during which every single electronic system within a 15-kilometer radius of Al-Tanf went completely dark. Communication systems, radar arrays, vehicle electronics, night vision equipment, encrypted radios, all of it, for 12 consecutive hours. And when those systems came back online, the evacuation order had already been given. In the next 20 minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly what Iran deployed in the Syrian desert, why the United States has no defense against it, and why this single weapon system has fundamentally altered the strategic calculus for every American military installation from Baghdad to Doha. This is the geopolitical reality the mainstream media is not equipped to explain, and if you are watching this video, you are about to understand something that took the Pentagon's own analysts 11 days to piece together. Subscribe now if you have not already, because what we are covering tonight is based on direct reporting from Defense Intelligence Agency assessments and on-the-ground accounts from Syrian opposition sources who watched this entire sequence unfold in real time. Let's start with Al-Tanf itself because most Americans have no idea this base even exists, let alone why it matters. The Al-Tanf garrison sits at the intersection of the Syrian, Iraqi, and Jordanian borders. It is 55 kilometers in diameter as a deconfliction zone. The base itself houses between 800 and 1,000 American troops at any given time, along with a rotating presence of British and Norwegian Special Operations Forces. Its stated mission is to train Syrian opposition fighters and prevent Iranian weapon shipments from moving through the Damascus to Baghdad highway. Its actual mission, according to multiple Pentagon sources who have spoken to investigative journalists over the past 3 years, is to control the border crossing and maintain a permanent American tripwire that blocks Iranian land access to the Mediterranean. That tripwire just got pulled. According to reporting by Military Times and confirmed by Al Monitor and multiple regional security analysts, the electronic blackout began at approximately 11:47 p.m. Syrian time on May 9th. Within 8 minutes, every radar system at Al-Tanf went offline. Encrypted SATCOM links to CENTCOM headquarters in Tampa went silent. Vehicle-mounted electronic countermeasures stopped functioning. Soldiers reported that even handheld GPS units were displaying error codes. Captain Marcus Whitfield, a signals intelligence officer who was stationed at Al-Tanf during a previous deployment and has maintained contact with personnel on the ground, described the scene in an interview with Task and Purpose as, and I am quoting him directly here, total electronic darkness in a way that no EMP training scenario had prepared us for. He went on to say, you could still fire a rifle, you could still start a diesel generator, but anything with a circuit board more complex than a 1980s era truck was either dead or behaving erratically. And it stayed that way for half a day. Subscribe if you're watching this and realizing you are not getting this level of technical detail anywhere else in Western media coverage. Now let's talk about what caused this blackout because the Pentagon's official statement, issued on May 11th, claimed it was due to atmospheric interference and equipment malfunction. That explanation held for approximately 36 hours before it collapsed under scrutiny from independent analysts who started comparing satellite imagery from the region. Announcement number 1, and this is where the narrative shifts entirely. Iran deployed a directed electromagnetic pulse weapon system, almost certainly a variant of what Russian military documentation refers to as a Ranets-E, or a domestically developed equivalent, to a position approximately 40 kilometers northeast of Al-Tanf. This system is not a nuclear EMP. It is not science fiction. It is a conventional, truck-mounted, highly directional radio frequency weapon that generates a localized electromagnetic pulse powerful enough to disable or severely degrade electronic systems within a targeted radius. According to a 2023 RAND Corporation assessment on emerging directed energy threats, these systems operate by generating a high-power microwave burst that induces voltage spikes in electronic circuits, effectively frying semiconductors and corrupting data storage. They are transportable, they require no exotic fuel, and critically, they leave no explosive residue, no missile fragments, and no physical evidence that would constitute an overt act of war under international law. Defense Security Asia reported on May 11th that Iranian-aligned forces, likely operating under the command structure of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Quds Force, positioned at least two of these systems in the desert terrain east of the Euphrates River. Satellite imagery analyzed by private intelligence firm Jane's Defense showed unusual vehicle deployments in that area on May 8th, one day before the blackout. The vehicles matched the configuration of known electromagnetic warfare platforms, large rectangular containers mounted on heavy-duty trucks, accompanied by mobile generator units and what appeared to be directional antenna arrays. The timing was not coincidental. On May 7th, 2 days before the blackout, the United States conducted airstrikes against Iranian-backed militia positions near the town of Abu Kamal, approximately 90 kilometers north of Al-Tanf. Those strikes killed 14 fighters and destroyed 3 weapons depots. The Iranian response was not another airstrike. It was not a rocket barrage. It was a 12-hour demonstration that every American base in the region is vulnerable to a weapon system that renders modern military technology temporarily useless. Received. That is announcement number 1. Announcement number 2, and this is the part that should concern every single person who works in defense logistics or national security planning. The evacuation of 847 troops from Al-Tanf was not a panic response. It was the execution of a pre-planned contingency protocol that the Pentagon has been developing since at least 2019, when similar but smaller-scale electronic disruptions occurred at bases in Iraq and Afghanistan. The protocol is called, according to a leaked Department of Defense planning document published by The Intercept in 2022, Operation Cascade Withdrawal, and it is triggered when a forward operating base loses the ability to maintain communication with higher command for more than 6 hours and faces an imminent risk of being overrun without close air support. The fact that this protocol was activated tells you everything you need to know about how seriously the Pentagon took the threat. Within 14 hours of the blackout beginning, CH-47 Chinook helicopters began shuttling personnel from Al-Tanf to the Al-Assad Air Base in western Iraq. Fixed-wing aircraft evacuated the remainder. According to Stars and Stripes, citing 2 anonymous defense officials, the evacuation was completed by 4 a.m. on May 10th, less than 18 hours after the electronic systems first went down. What did not get evacuated was most of the heavy equipment. M1 Abrams tanks, mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles, radar installations, and at least 1 Patriot missile battery were left behind at Al-Tanf, now under the protection of a skeleton crew of fewer than 100 personnel whose primary job is not defense, but damage control and equipment retrieval when and if it becomes safe to do so. Think carefully about what this represents. The United States military, the most technologically advanced fighting force in human history, abandoned a strategically critical base on 18 hours' notice because Iran demonstrated it could turn that base into an electronically deaf and blind position at will. That is not a tactical setback. That is a systemic vulnerability. Stay with me because this is where it gets significantly more alarming and where the implications extend far beyond one base in Syria. Announcement number 3, and almost nobody in the American press is connecting this correctly. The electromagnetic pulse capability that Iran demonstrated at Al-Tanf is not a one-off experimental system. It is part of a broader family of directed energy weapons that Iran has been developing in partnership with Russia and China for at least a decade, and which are now being deployed across multiple theaters in the Middle East. According to research published by the Institute for National Security Studies in Tel Aviv, Iran acquired the technical documentation for Russian Ranetsi systems as early as 2014 during a period of expanded military cooperation following the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action negotiations. Iranian defense engineers reverse-engineered those systems, localized production, and began field testing them in Syria starting in 2018. The first confirmed use was against Israeli drone operations near the Golan Heights in 2019, when multiple UAVs experienced simultaneous navigation failures during reconnaissance missions. Israel attributed those failures to advanced electronic warfare, but did not publicly identify the specific weapon system. The reason Iran invested so heavily in this technology is simple. It neutralizes America's primary military advantages. American forces rely on precision-guided munitions, satellite communications, advanced avionics, and networked battlefield management systems. All of those capabilities depend on functioning electronics. A weapon system that can temporarily disable those electronics does not need to destroy an F-35 fighter jet. It just needs to make that F-35 unable to navigate, communicate, or deploy its weapons for long enough to render it irrelevant. The Strategic Studies Institute at the U.S. Army War College published an assessment in 2023 warning that adversarial development of high-power microwave weapons posed a critical and under-addressed threat to American force projection. The report noted, and I am quoting directly, The proliferation of directed energy systems capable of degrading or destroying electronics at operationally significant ranges represents a challenge to U.S. military superiority that current doctrine and defensive systems are not adequately prepared to counter. That assessment was written 18 months ago. The events at Al-Tanf on May 9th and 10th are the operational proof of concept. Received. That is announcement number 3. Now let's talk about what is really happening behind the Pentagon's carefully worded press releases and why the mainstream media is not giving you the full picture. There are 2 stories unfolding simultaneously. The first story, the one you will read in CNN or the Washington Post, is about a temporary equipment malfunction at a remote outpost that necessitated a routine personnel adjustment. The second story, the one you will not read unless you are following military affairs analysts and Middle Eastern security sources, is that the United States just lost a strategic base because Iran unveiled a weapon system that fundamentally changes the calculus of American military presence in the region. The Pentagon's official statement, released on May 11th, said that U.S. forces conducted a planned repositioning of personnel from Al-Tanf garrison as part of ongoing efforts to optimize force posture in the CENTCOM area of responsibility. Notice what that statement does not mention: electromagnetic pulses, Iranian weapon systems, electronic warfare, evacuation, or anything resembling an emergency response. It is a masterclass in bureaucratic obfuscation designed to avoid admitting that the United States was forced out of a base it has held for 8 years by a weapon it has no defense against. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, when asked about Al-Tanf during a press briefing on May 12th, stated that the security of our forces is our top priority and we continuously assess the threats they face and adjust accordingly. When pressed by a reporter from Defense News about whether electronic warfare played a role, Austin declined to comment on operational specifics. Translation: yes, and we do not want to talk about it. Meanwhile, Iranian state media has been significantly less coy. On May 11th, Tasnim news agency, which has close ties to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, published an editorial with the headline, "American Technology Defeated by Islamic Innovation." The editorial did not specifically claim credit for the Al-Tanf blackout, but it did include a paragraph stating, "Recent developments in Syria demonstrate that the era of American electronic superiority is ending, and resistance forces possess capabilities that render occupying armies vulnerable in ways they have not yet publicly acknowledged." That is not subtle. That is a victory lap. Here is what that means for the broader regional picture. The United States currently maintains approximately 35,000 troops across bases in Iraq, Syria, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia. Every single one of those bases depends on electronic communications, radar, precision navigation, and networked defense systems. If Iran can disable those systems at Al-Tanf, it can disable them at Al-Assad. If it can disable them at Al-Assad, it can disable them at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, which houses the forward headquarters of U.S. Central Command and is the logistical nerve center for American operations across the Middle East. That is not speculation. That is the logical extension of a demonstrated capability. Think about what this means for American pilots flying missions over Syria or Iraq. Think about what this means for Navy vessels operating in the Persian Gulf, where GPS-guided munitions and radar-based targeting are the foundation of every strike package. Think about what this means for the credibility of American security guarantees to Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the Gulf states, all of whom have been told for decades that American technological superiority ensures their safety. If you are a Saudi prince sitting in Riyadh, and you just watched the United States abandon a base because Iran turned off the lights, how confident are you that American air defense systems will protect your oil fields the next time the Houthis launch a drone swarm? If you are an Israeli defense planner and you just watched 847 American troops evacuate because their radio stopped working, how confident are you that the U.S. military can maintain air superiority over Iranian nuclear facilities if a strike order is ever given? These are not hypothetical questions. These are the questions being asked right now in defense ministries from Tel Aviv to Abu Dhabi. This pattern has repeated itself throughout history, and every time it repeats, the outcome follows the same trajectory. The Maginot Line was the most advanced static defense system in the world in 1939. France invested billions of francs in fortifications, artillery, and interconnected communication networks designed to make invasion impossible. Germany bypassed it by going through Belgium and rendered the entire system irrelevant not by destroying it, but by making it strategically useless. The lesson was not that fortifications do not work. The lesson was that over-reliance on a single technological advantage creates a vulnerability the moment an adversary finds a way to negate that advantage. The United States has built its military superiority on precision technology, satellite communications, and networked battlefield management. For 30 years, that advantage has been unchallengeable. Iran just demonstrated that it is no longer unchallengeable. The Altanf evacuation is the equivalent of Germany going through Belgium. It is not the destruction of American power. It is the revelation that American power can be bypassed, and once that revelation is made, every adversary starts looking for ways to exploit it. The Peloponnesian War offers another parallel. Athens built its empire on naval superiority. The Athenian fleet was faster, better trained, and technologically superior to anything Sparta could field. But Sparta did not try to outbuild Athens. It built a land army that made Athenian naval dominance irrelevant by simply refusing to fight at sea, and instead laying waste to Athenian agricultural lands, forcing Athens into a grinding war of attrition it could not win. Iran is not trying to build a better F-35. It is building weapons that make the F-35's advantages irrelevant in the environments where they matter most. So where does this leave us? Let me give you 3 clear paths forward because there is no honest middle ground here, and each path leads to a fundamentally different Middle East. Path 1. The Pentagon develops and deploys hardened electronic systems and effective countermeasures to directed energy weapons within the next 24 to 36 months. This would require a crash program on the scale of the Manhattan Project, involving billions of dollars in research and development, complete overhauls of existing platforms, and the deployment of new shielding and redundancy systems to every forward operating base in the region. It would also require the United States to acknowledge publicly that it faces a critical vulnerability, which runs counter to decades of messaging about unchallengeable technological superiority. The likelihood of this path is moderate if the political will exists, but the timeline is prohibitive. By the time these systems are deployed, Iran will have distributed its electromagnetic pulse capabilities to Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and militia forces in Iraq. The vulnerability window is now, and closing it will take years. Path 2, the United States accepts a reduced forward military presence in the Middle East and shifts to an offshore balancing strategy that relies on rapid deployment forces rather than permanent bases vulnerable to electronic warfare. This would mean abandoning or significantly drawing down installations in Syria, Iraq, and potentially even some locations in the Gulf. It would shift the burden of regional security to local partners, Israel, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, while maintaining over-the-horizon strike capabilities from carrier groups and bases in more secure locations. This path is politically unpalatable in Washington, where both parties remain committed to forward presence as a deterrent, but it is strategically logical. If your bases are liabilities rather than assets, you do not double down on defending them. You move them out of range. The likelihood of this path is increasing, especially if additional incidents occur in the next 6 months. Path 3, and this is the one I think we are drifting toward whether by intent or by neglect, the United States does nothing substantial, continues to claim that Al-Tanf was an isolated incident, and waits for the next electromagnetic pulse event to force another hasty evacuation, or worse, to occur during an active combat scenario where troops are left without communication or navigation in a hostile environment. This path leads to a strategic disaster, likely within the next 12 to 18 months, and a significant loss of American credibility across the region. It is the path of least resistance, which is why it is the most dangerous. I think we are closer to path 3 than anyone in the Pentagon wants to admit, because the institutional bias is always toward minimizing the threat, claiming that existing systems are adequate, and avoiding the difficult political conversations that come with acknowledging a major vulnerability. But every day that passes without a serious response is a day that Iran and its proxies gain confidence that they can operate freely in the electromagnetic warfare domain. Here are the questions I want you to take away from this analysis. First, if the United States cannot protect its own bases from electronic warfare, how can it credibly promise to protect its allies? Second, how many more Al-Tams need to happen before the Pentagon admits this is a systemic problem rather than an isolated equipment failure? Third, what happens when this weapon system is used not against a remote desert outpost, but against a major air base during an actual military operation? Tell me in the comments what you think the Biden administration does next. Tell me if you think the Pentagon is taking this threat seriously, or if you think we are heading toward Path 3. We will keep tracking every development in Syria, Iraq, and across the electromagnetic warfare landscape because this story is far from over, and the next chapter could be written at any American base from Baghdad to Bahrain. Subscribe now. Share this analysis with everyone who needs to understand that the rules of Middle Eastern military engagement just changed in a way the evening news is not explaining. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next breakdown, and we will see you in the next video.